Breaking right now, each day everybody is reminded directly or indirectly that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. Now, investors, in fact, reminded today, well, every time you peek in your portfolio, but particularly today, right? You look at the top performing names in today's session. At the top of the list, Salesforce.com is surging. Now, here's the thing. It's all about AI, you know, and just earlier this year, Salesforce.com, the stock got hammered because they were falling behind. They had no real AI vision that the street could see. Down at 1.16% on the year. Now it's up over 40% on the year. And I got to tell you, I continue to marvel at these managers that have sort of written off the notion of a fourth industrial revolution and the key components from AI to Bitcoin and the blockchain. I got to tell you something. I am a natural-born Luddite. I always tell people, if I was around when Net Ludd was around, I would have been breaking up weaving machines too. But I know that these moments have several things in common. That ultimately humankind enjoys richer existence because of the driven visionaries. But it's never an easy transition, and it's never without controversy. Today, we have two of those visionaries with us that the world will be talking about 100 years from now. Sam Altman later on in this show, and Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy's executive chairman and Bitcoin evangelist, joins us now. Michael, it's so good to see you in the flesh, my man.
Here I am.
Here you are. So let's talk about this because there are three things I want to talk to you about in this interview. First, I want to talk about this MicroStrategy approach to buying Bitcoin because it's got Wall Street on fire. Some people are excited, some people aren't. So the strategy is essentially you're raising billions of dollars to buy Bitcoin. You have a convertible bond with arbitrage opportunities. Volatility is a financial engine. Usually volatility in this circumstance is a positive thing and also suitable for raising money in the future. So walk us through how does it really work?
Well, you've got one group of investors that want low volatility. They want a secure, comfortable ride. So we sell them a convertible bond. You've got other kinds of investors that want super high performance, the sports car. They're buying the equity. We borrow the money from the convertible bond market at 0% interest. We buy Bitcoin, we lever up the equity, so the equity outperforms Bitcoin, and that's great for equity investors. And for the bond investors, they can't stand the equity risk, they don't want the downside risk, but they have a huge appetite for the bonds.
Why do they have, you know, I saw one of the critics that said, you know, who the hell is buying these? Who's buying them? They said, why would anyone buy them? They have 0% interest.
Well, one group of people would be long Bitcoin investors. They're going to buy the bonds because they get the upside of Bitcoin without the downside. Another group of investors are convertible arbitragers. They actually buy the bond, short the stock, extract sort of a risk-free premium out of the instrument, and they can only do that with a convertible bond. They can't do it with equity, and they can't do it with Bitcoin.
So again, you face a lot of critics with all of this. What do you say to people who are saying, hey, you're making up financial terms? Like, you know, all the stuff you're kind of talking about is gobbledygook, and it's made up, and it's just sort of taking advantage of a moment in time when there's sort of a financial hysteria around the world, and it's not sustainable.
Well, I would say that public companies exist to issue securities. So some fixed income investors, they want a guaranteed coupon, or they want low risk, and they want to participate without the volatility. Others want to make an investment. If you want to invest in New York City, you can either buy the real estate or you can invest in a company that borrows a lot of money to develop 10 times as much real estate. So we're offering investors whatever degree of risk and performance they want. And there's hundreds of trillions of dollars in the capital market that absolutely has to buy a security, and they cannot buy the commodity. Right. So we're serving their need.
The volatility as a positive from your perspective, I think you called it or equated it to fire some earlier in the week. Explain that part of it.
Well, imagine I have a 40-ton weight in my backyard. It's a sculpture. That's US dollars on the balance sheet. Imagine I take the 40-ton weight and I put it on a flywheel and I spin it 60 RPM. That's a turbine. Now imagine I extend the arm a bit and I get it to go 120 RPM and I plug it into a power plant. Now I've got a reactor. And so what MicroStrategy is doing is we're tapping in that volatility. We're using $40 billion of capital to capture the energy. We're powering our equity forward, and we're benefiting the entire crypto economy and the conventional capital markets.
So, Michael, recently had a chance to address Microsoft to explain them the value of all of this Bitcoin, and you're obviously proud of yourself. We saw your video. I think what it takes 17 takes. But I thought
21 times.
21 times, not
21
bad,
times.
not bad. I
Yeah.
think one time it took Earl Campbell like 59 times to do one commercial. I think it's a great opportunity, though, for, to borrow some of these slides to educate also the audience, because not everyone knows the benefits. So obviously I wanted to start with this because it dovetails into the whole conversation of the fourth industrial revolution, this technology wave, digital capital coming right after, of course, the personal computer down to AI. What distinguishes this, the digital capital?
Look, when we saw digital photos transform, a lot of people didn't get the fact that Kodak was going to get replaced by Instagram and Facebook, but they get digital photos. Digital capital is what happens when your long-term store of value goes from a building or goes from a portfolio of stocks to a digital asset like Bitcoin. Bitcoin represents the digital transformation of hundreds of trillions of dollars of capital in the world.
Right.
No one expected to see it, so they don't quite get
Right.
what it's going to be, except for the fact it's worth all the money in the world.
So let's talk about that, because you do have you have a couple of slides showing assets around the world. First, okay, let's start with this from again geared toward Microsoft, but some critics would say when you talk about digital capital being economically and technically superior, no tax. I mean, that doesn't mean it can't be taxed in certain jurisdictions at some point. No torts. You know, legal issues are going to come up. No regulator. I mean, these are great points, but are they forever points?
The point is, I got $100 million in New York City and I buy a building, I got to worry about someone slipping and falling on the sidewalk and a property tax. But if I can snap my fingers and teleport the building to Zambia, Central Africa, or to Monaco, all of a sudden it's a teleportable building. And of course, if I don't have any tenants in the building, I don't got to worry about them defaulting.
Right,
so.
right.
Digital capital is the ability to move the money at the speed of light anywhere on Earth and program it on a computer. There's a lot of people that are going to want that rather than having, you know, pick a country in Africa where you want to invest your life savings in a building.
Right.
Forever.
Yeah, let's say Angola.
Right, and what happens if the government fails? You lose everything.
Exactly.
But if you could put the building in your pocket and go to the place where you like the government, maybe you get to keep your money.
Great. Let's talk about how it's going to grow. So in your presentation, you have this slide twice. The first one, right now, Bitcoin is $2 trillion. You're saying in 21 years, $280 trillion. How do we get there?
What I'm saying is the wealth in the entire world is growing because of innovation, because
Right.
of technology, but also because of inflation. And people are thinking to sell their Central African real estate to buy Bitcoin, or sell their Siberian natural gas to buy Bitcoin, or sell their Argentine currency to buy Bitcoin. So as people migrate their capital into this global monetary asset, that asset class is going to grow faster
Than the rest
than
of them.
equity, faster than gold, faster than real estate.
But also, did I read somewhere that you're saying each Bitcoin would be worth the equivalent of $13 million?
Yeah, well, when you crank in the growth rate, which for me, the base case is 29% a year on average for 21 years, that gets you from where we are today to 13 million a coin in the year 2045.
All right, so we've talked about the financial parts of this. You and I have had great conversations in the past about the humanitarian part of this, right? And I want to talk about that. You just mentioned Africa, for instance. Bitcoin's philosophy and political promise. This is an article from 2022. It's not just a decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It's more, right? This is what this article is saying. And it's going to have an impact on economies, philosophy, politics, human rights, and society. That is huge to live up to.
Bitcoin is a protocol for prosperity. Fire, electricity, steel, English, mathematics. You would give them to the world. Bitcoin is an economic protocol. Once you master Bitcoin, you can figure out how to save your wealth, how to economically prosper. It works for a country, a company, a family, an individual. Nobody owns it. It's a utilitarian, egalitarian entitlement, just a good for the world. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about it.
And particularly underdeveloped nations, right? I mean, this is what we're really talking about, a way for them to catch up. I mean, right now, if you're an underdeveloped nation and you want to try to catch up, you're at the whims or the mercy of the IMF or the World Bank, who, quite frankly, they have rates sometimes that are like, that makes the mafia blush, right? I mean, to me, you're always going to be an underdeveloped nation if you have to go to the World Bank to borrow money.
If you're a type 1 diabetic, you can eat continuously and you'll starve to death because you cannot store organic energy. If you don't have a capital asset like Bitcoin, I can send billions or tens of billions of dollars to Africa. You can make billions. The money will just drain out of your capital structure because you're storing it in a currency which is collapsing faster than you can actually generate it.
Will large industrialized countries allow this to live up to its promise? It's one thing to say it's a $2 trillion asset. It's another to say, hey, eventually this will replace fiat currency, which a lot of folks believe it will.
I think you've got to keep in mind money bifurcates into currency, the medium of exchange, of which the dollar is the world reserve currency, and capital, the store of value, of which right now real estate and equity portfolios are the world reserve capital. Bitcoin is emerging to compete with equity and real estate as world reserve capital. But those Africans, they can't buy real estate in the US. They can't buy equity in the New York Stock Exchange. It's global capital. And once you understand that, you realize that every nation that respects property rights is going to support Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If you go communist, full-on socialist, North Korea, Cuba, they're going to expropriate your property. But any place where people respect property rights and they give you a chance for capitalism and freedom, they're going to allow you to have Bitcoin. And the competitor really is, the Vanguard 500 is going to get demonetized a little bit, and then instead of buying a real estate portfolio and a third apartment, you buy some Bitcoin, and I don't think that's threatening to anybody.
Wow. Well, the Trump administration, no, because they're talking about a strategic reserve. But, you know, again, these nations that are in trouble, maybe. I do want to point out, I always talk to people about this, like Yap Stone money. You know, a lot of folks don't realize, you know, it was worth something, in part because it was so dangerous to go to other islands to get it, to bring it back home, and to manufacture it. So there is a certain inherent wealth. All right, the third part of this, I got to talk about your saga, because you are such an amazing story. This right here, the headline from the New York Daily News in March of 2000. Lost $6 billion in a day. Hotshot tech CEO loses his fortune. I mean, they blamed you for this massive crash in the stock. How did you deal with this then and stay focused to get to where you are right now?
It's very humbling. It reminds you sometimes that you need a good team and you can't do too much too fast. I wish I'd had Bitcoin back then. My life would have been a lot easier. I think having lived through all the difficulties of my 30 years in business, when I got to the point where I saw Bitcoin, I realized the elegance of
Did you have a eureka moment
when
you put it all together? Was there like a eureka moment? You ran out of the house with a bath towel on, like, I figured it out.
Yeah, it's everybody working themselves to death as hard as they can, and they can't get ahead.
Yeah.
And that's because you're trying to do too much, but you don't have the right savings technology. And so Bitcoin was that way out of that working myself to death.
Of course, you still have detractors now. Give me an example. I'm sure you know Jim Chanos, for instance. Of course, famous hedge fund manager known for shorting companies. He shorted Enron. This is just a recent tweet where he went after you. Now, part of this probably is because you crushed him. I mean, let's face it, he was short your stock for a long time, and I'm sure he's gotten hammered. But there are other people out there that are saying this whole thing, again, getting a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier, it's just sort of a P.T. Barnum act. You know, what do you say to the folks on the street that still don't get it?
Well, I think there are a lot of successful, well-known people that just don't understand digital capital. I mean, there were successful people running Kodak. There's successful people running Xerox, and there are successful people that didn't care for the automobile or electricity. I think another decade and they'll start to appreciate it. But right now, you're going to have a lot of rich, famous people that are skeptical until they put in the 100 hours to learn about Bitcoin.
I was just telling my team, I read an article recently that 20 years after the invention of the automobile, there was a movement to get rid of it. They said, we tried it, it didn't work, it's slow, it's not as reliable as a horse and buggy. So to your point, maybe it takes some time. I can't let you go without talking about the future after you pass away, because you've talked about establishing a sort of mission, a charity to support Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin forever. What does that look like in your mind?
Well, you know, I'm reminded of the fact that Rockefeller contributed a lot of money to a lot of causes, and 100 years after his death, people are criticizing him for something that one of his charities is doing right now. So sometimes you got to be careful about big charity. But what I would say about Bitcoin, which is just wonderful, is if you accumulate a lot of wealth in Bitcoin and you just burn the keys when you leave, you're making a pro rata contribution to everybody that owns Bitcoin in the world based upon their contribution and their knowledge of Bitcoin. So I think that supporting Bitcoin as a protocol for prosperity is just a great thing to do. And otherwise, I think, take the Bitcoin with you.
Yeah. Will you be known more for the economic success or the humanitarian success?
I hope I'm known for having taken the torch from Satoshi and went on to commercialize Bitcoin with corporations and governments decades after he passed.
All right. Let's remember what happened to Prometheus. Let's hope that doesn't happen to you as you try to pass the torch on. Michael, great stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you,
Great
Charles.
stuff.